Met with Connie and Diane earlier and discussed what we're going to be going over today at the meeting. And there's several things. Do we have copies?
I don't have copies of.
Did you make the copies?
I made one of the items on the agenda. Yeah, there's some information. Sir, do you want me to just kind of launch into?
Yeah, we have some votes we have to make so they can know exactly what figures to use for their final recommendations. And it's pretty much, we've already discussed quite a few of these, so it's nothing new to us. But Diane will we have to discuss it as a committee and make resolutions, so it's all official. And I'll let Diane get started with that.
Okay, well, I've got a little bit of background to kind of explain why we have a really heavy agenda tonight. And I thought we would talk a little bit in merit. What I wanted to talk about a little bit was the court order, because it really doesn't change anything in terms of the goal, in terms of the approach, in terms of the work that's been done so far by this committee. It really changes, though, the level of detail and our ability to collect factual data going forward. Because of the August 20th deadline, and I'm assuming everybody's read about it, the village can't afford to wait for answers from the state. And as you all know, we're waiting for the Comptroller's Office to come back with information for results of discussions with the unions that are being undertaken by the village, and for research regarding the anticipated costs of dissolution, related expenses that we have to list in the plan. And examples of some of those: the rehabilitation of space, appraisals and actuarials, if indeed they are necessary. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight. Insurances, the property insurance, the property and liability, the workers' comp insurance, things like legal costs. Most regrettably, there is going to be little or certainly less opportunity to discuss the remaining issues regarding assets and debt and proposed service delivery with the town board, which I know was a goal from the very beginning. It was originally planned in the scope of what would be accomplished with this committee. So, we still want to ensure that the published draft of the dissolution plan is the best possible representation of the town board's intent for implementation, and it's going to be a challenge to do that without trying to really have a lot of discussions with the town board. So, expediting this process has been a goal all along of both MRB Group and the committee. We've worked very closely with all of you at the subcommittee level and certainly on the full committee level with many, many meetings. And we're pleased with the progress that the committee has made in what we would characterize as far less time than any other municipality that's undertaken this process so far. To further expedite completion, MRB Group has been working over the past several weeks. Connie has been building in advance the spreadsheets that are going to be necessary to be the foundation for the fiscal analysis that we've been talking to you about. So, in order to be helpful in terms of what's left for this committee to do, and in light of the August 20th deadline, we have isolated a list of as many of the outstanding pieces of information as possible. The village attorney, Art Williams, has clarified for us that the judge's order is for all information to be collected by August 20th. So by then, every outstanding question has to be answered. So this is going to be something we all have to tackle together. In the absence of factual data, the committee is going to have to determine a set of assumptions. And these assumptions will become the committee's working answers to the missing pieces of information that are needed in order for Connie to proceed with that spreadsheet and that fiscal analysis. So tonight's meeting was originally going to focus on alternatives and what should be included in the plan in terms of alternatives. In addition to that, because of this August deadline, we're going to have to review with you that list of outstanding information that needs to be discussed. And we're going to ask the committee to begin establishing the assumptions that are necessary to answer the questions. We're going to apologize in advance because the extra hardship that these discussions might create could be unnecessary. I mean, the information might be received in time. We might get a miraculous phone call from the controller's office. Do we expect it? No, but it might happen. But the village, and therefore this committee, can't really afford to risk waiting it out. So that's why tonight we're going to work through a list of outstanding information and hopefully come to some decisions about what they would look like. So alternatives to be included in the plan. Let's tackle that first.
Yep.
Sergey? Okay. So number one, early on in the process of discussing what would be included in the plan, what came up in discussion was, what would alternatives look like? Are they going to require a completely separate analysis? I don't know if you remember some of those discussions. And what was said back then was that it really didn't require setting aside extra time because, in fact, a lot of the post-dissolution vision for service delivery and a lot of those options that the subcommittees were likely to come up with might very well end up being viable alternatives. Any post-dissolution service delivery option that can be implemented in the absence of dissolution is a viable alternative to dissolution. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask this committee to put forth a motion just to establish, for the sake of the plan and for the sake of giving us marching orders, that all post-dissolution options included in the published documentation of the subcommittees that have been approved by the committee are also used wherever possible as alternatives if their implementation does not depend upon the dissolution of the village. That would be how I would word a resolution of the committee.
Say that again. If the
all post-dissolution options included in the published documentation, in other words, the reports that came from subcommittees that were approved by the committee, that they also be used wherever possible as alternatives if their implementation does not depend on dissolution of the village.
You want to give them the
Some examples?
the example?
Okay. So, for instance, village court. So the court subcommittee recommended elimination of village court. So that is, in fact, a service delivery option, I guess, that, I guess I would phrase it that way. That is a way of handling how court services are delivered. Eliminate the village court and instead depend on the town court to provide those services to the community. That was the post-dissolution recommendation by that committee. It actually could very well be implemented without the dissolution of the village. So if the village chose to continue to exist, or if the village does continue to exist, then there's no reason why that couldn't be implemented with the proper procedures. And we're not going to evaluate the procedures, and there really is no necessarily costs associated with the procedures, but it certainly can be implemented as an alternative. Zoning and codes, there was a discussion in that report of one full-time position becoming one part-time and 0.5 part-time clerical, which is budgeted currently becomes 0.25 part-time clerical in the post-dissolution budgeting. There's no reason that can't be implemented. So these are just examples of what was already established by the subcommittees and then could easily be alternatives.
So the alternatives are going to be only if the village doesn't dissolve?
Right.
Right. Because otherwise it would be the dissolution plan as it's the recommendations in terms of what's included in the plan. Just to cover the rest of the list, public safety. This one, I guess I would like some indication from the committee. The fire department can still become a district, but I would like to note that there's no cost advantage in terms of a reduction in expenditures associated with that based on the recommendation that was provided by the subcommittee. However, it would then become not a village tax, but rather its own taxing jurisdiction. It would become a district expense rather than a village tax. So it's a possible alternative. There's no reduction in expenses associated with it, so you may or may not want to include it. Excuse me. But public safety, police, there was discussion about eliminating 3 full-time positions, 1 sergeant, 1 patrol, and 1 clerk. And it included partial shift elimination and use of part-time personnel. That there's no reason that that can't be also calculated and included among the list of alternatives.
Well, if the village did not dissolve, all those items would be subject to mandatory negotiation with the unit.
They would be, but they would still be negotiated, and depending on the clauses, Chief. I mean, it's still a viable option. There isn't anything legally that says you couldn't cut some police personnel and still maintain the village.
Yeah. The last one is the admin committee had recommended elimination of 1 part-time water and sewer clerk and 1 part-time assessor clerk. That particular recommendation was based on the assumption that court and PD would be co-located and that the admin offices would be 1 admin office. Obviously, post-dissolution, there'd only be 1 admin office. So a separate resolution, if you do pass the first resolution that I'm recommending, a separate resolution might be, as an alternative, the co-location of courts and PD, and then separately the co-location of both administrative offices. That would be a good alternative as well to include. And then that would allow for the sharing of resources on the admin side, so implementation of those admin recommendations as an alternative.
So basically, we need a recommendation or a vote from the committee to make that the resolution, that if there are items that we pass as subcommittees that can be used in the overall changes in the village, if the village is not dissolved, to make the government more efficient and hopefully save some money, taxpayer money, we would make that as an alternative if the dissolution plan does not work.
As an alternative in the plan, in the dissolution plan that's published by the village.
Right.
Why do we feel that the dissolution plan is not going to work?
That's not what this is.
Oh, okay.
No, what it is that the state told us we had to come up with options. If it does not dissolve, we still should give options on the way the town and village could work together to make things more efficient. So this is, it might never come to pass, but we have to put it in our final document.
I mean, it seems when we first started that it was just dissolution and the alternatives came in.
And this is something from the very beginning that was discussed.
Diana, these alternatives, do they suggest this stuff to the village? They don't have to do it, or who makes the decision on who's going to do what or not?
Ultimately, this plan is going to be recommendations of the committee that are going to be accepted and adopted by the village, and they will be the standing dissolution plan going forward. That's meeting the state mandate and meeting the village's self-determined obligation to provide information to the residents. So that being the case, the presentation would be what the post-dissolution services would look like, and then it was determined from the get-go that there would also be alternatives to dissolution presented in the plan. So really all we're asking for is marching orders for what to include in the plan, include in this document that we're going to help draft. And so we're just establishing.
The alternatives.
I'll make a motion to do that.
The alternatives, the final ultimate, just like the plan, the final decision is going to be the town boards. The alternatives are going to be the final decision would be by the village board.
Just by the village board, we won't have no input whatsoever to it?
Well,
Well,
you're going to have, this is your
recommendation.
input.
Okay.
There's going to be a separate spreadsheet with all, what the
I mean,
alternatives
would we
look
go over it
like.
with them? You know,
Yeah,
You're going to be presenting to the,
okay.
you're going to get together with the village board.
The village board is going to be, presented this plan and is
Right.
going to be having to accept the plan. And then, of course, there's a public hearing process, but right now, we're only talking about what's going to be included in the plan. That's really what this is about, is what the marching orders are from this committee in terms of what's included.
so I have a motion, do I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes.
Okay. So the second, should we include in the alternatives the co-location of court and PD, as well as co-location of administrative offices for the purposes
If we're
of
gonna
being able
be,
to implement the recommendations that the admin committee, subcommittee came up with?
since there was going to be cost savings by eliminating positions, I feel that should be part of the recommendation also.
Okay.
The co-locations, is that changing what we already
No.
established?
No,
That's what we,
exactly.
yeah,
It'd be the same. Okay.
yep. So, a motion?
So John makes the motion, Sylvia or John, or whoever seconds. Everybody's shaking their head.
John?
I'm gonna call
All in
for the
favor?
vote.
Aye.
Opposed?
I abstain.
Passes.
Okay. Okay,
Next item?
next amendment.
Yes.
Okay, these would be.
There's only 3 pages. so
Yes.
That's 1 page
And
is
it's
down.
big font, it's big
Yeah,
font.
big font.
Okay.
Okay. These, will now begin discussion about some of the outstanding questions that we need committee determination in terms of the assumptions that would be made. Yes?
Alternative recommendations, was there going to be any recommendation for Highway Department, DPW?
There was no alternative, there was no post-dissolution change in delivery of services as part of the recommendation for Highway Department. So there really wasn't anything to interpret as alternative. That does not mean, I didn't mean to suggest that discussion would be precluded. So I defer to the chairman on that one.
Well, let's go through the rest of the items you had on the list, so we can get back to DPW and Highway Department.
Okay. Okay, so outstanding questions for the committee. We need a determination of what will be the assumptions that we'll use moving forward. I mentioned the county have been working on a spreadsheet. There are missing pieces of information, and in fact, the order for August 20th is to have the information gathered together and to be able to demonstrate to the judge that all that information has been gathered. So that's the focus tonight, is to identify missing pieces of information. So the first item on my agenda here is reserve accounts.
This we handed out to the village reserve accounts that are currently set up by the village. We have the Department of Public Works equipment, the fire truck reserve, the police car reserve, the water reserve fund, and the sewer reserve fund.
This was, can I just interject? This was part of the questions and one of a number of questions that the mayor originally presented to the controller's office. And we've not yet gotten a response, again, because of the deadline. We cannot really afford to wait for a response. So what we're asking the committee to do is help come to a decision about what will be the working assumption going forward in the absence of the answer from the controller's office.
Now, right now, there are sums in the reserve accounts that may be used up within the next 2 years. So it may be a moot point. But the Department of Public Works equipment and the police car reserve fund are 2 items that the village taxpayers have paid into only. And my thought is that the $63,787.20 and the $28,345.30 are two items that we might want to say would pay down any debt that the village has.
Exactly.
So, since the fire truck reserve, there's $90,707 in there, the town taxpayers have already been paying into that money too. We pay a separate line item onto the fire department. So that goes into the total budget. And the thought was with the fire truck reserve, that would be turned over to the fire district upon dissolution. The water reserve fund and the sewer reserve fund, since they're separate items and they're basically paid by as a user fee, they would stay intact. So my recommendation is that the water reserve fund, the sewer reserve fund stay intact and goes over as they are. The fire truck reserve fund would go to the new fire district. And then any money in the Department of Public Works equipment and the police car reserve fund would, if there's any money left in 2 years, would go to pay off any debt that the village currently has.
Can I just clarify a couple of things? The costing, and the reason why we're asking about this now, we have to, this assumption will include presuming that the reserve accounts will still be in. Our budget comparison is the budget year, the previous budget year, against what post-dissolution services might look like. And one of the questions in terms of that comparative is what debt will remain as part of a debt district for former village residents, so that when we are calculating tax impacts, there will be a calculation of whatever change will occur in the tax rate, and presumably a reduction would occur in the tax rate, presumably, but that if there in fact is a debt district that remains, that would be an additional charge. So there'd be a reduction in the tax rate, but there would be a district charge for former village residents. We're trying to, as part of this mandate, demonstrate what the actual tax impacts will be based on the assumptions that this committee has created and has established. So that's the reason why we're asking the question about the reserve accounts, because you have two choices. One is, as Sergey just talked about, one is the transfer of the reserve accounts to the town intact so that they continue to be used for the purposes they were established for. The other is if in fact those reserve accounts are going to be used, now the controller has already said, and we understand the spirit of creating a reserve account, that money is earmarked for a special purpose. So if in fact the committee's recommendation is to utilize the reserve accounts for the purpose of reducing debt, it would have to be used to reduce debt primarily in the cost center for which that reserve account was created. So if it was created in a cost center associated with equipment purchase, for instance, then it would make sense to use it for a debt related to equipment purchases. So it's keeping it within its original intent, and the controller would have likely no issue with that because it still respects its original purpose.
I think one of the questions that we'd asked to the controller was the reserve funds were set up for a specific purpose through our annual budget appropriation. Is it appropriate to now use them for debt instead of, say, for police car or for within the fire district or DPW equipment. Is there an answer to that? Can we do that? Can we appropriated for a purpose, and now we're changing the purpose.
Well, okay. That's why I'm saying that if it's used primarily to reduce debt in the same cost center that it was appropriated to be used for. So equipment to reduce equipment debt. That would be respecting the spirit of the original intent of the earmarking. Will that in fact end up being, there's not much debt. The village doesn't have much debt to speak of.
If you do not have a debt, for example, let's say in the DPW, you had no debt within the DPW. When we had looked into it, council had said, typically that would be very true, that you had to use it in the spirit that it was intended for. But once the village dissolved, that intent goes away. And as long as, if you didn't have a debt within, for example, DPW, as long as you kept it in the fund, you were very much legal to be able to draw it down and put it towards something like DPW in the general fund. If you had any general fund debt, you could draw that down if you chose to, or you could say, we want to send it over to the town with the spirit that we want to make sure they have a little starting seed money to start to replace any of the equipment, as you had mentioned there.
Okay.
Well,
So we just need the determination for the sake of costing, because if it's going to be used to draw down debt, then that would in
The debt
fact
service-
affect the
the
debt
debt service
service.
would be
That
less.
will be a financial impact post-dissolution on former village residents.
so where does all the bonds go? The debt bonds?
That's
We have,
You mean if we draw them down, or just if
No,
we don't?
no, I'm just saying, this is for the debt we're trying to figure out who's going to pay the debt. But we have,
well, the debt itself is staying with the former village residents.
so all the bonding of the equipment.
We're going to have to do some research in terms of whether bonds, do you have the list of what's outstanding, Mayor?
Well, there's the fire trucks.
What we don't know is if they're callable.
They're callable. I
They're
was going to
callable.
say, we're going to have to do some research in terms of what's callable.
What's callable?
What's that mean?
Some
Early payoff.
public, pardon me?
Early payoff, right?
Right.
There's some
Oh, okay.
non-callable that you're not
Non-callable,
allowed.
yeah,
Yeah.
You're not allowed to pay them off. We had one at the village of Seneca Falls that we could not pay off. It was non-callable. All of these will transfer, the ones that will still have debt and bonds will transfer over to the town. And it'll be up to the town to get a hold of each of the bond. They'll probably go through the bond council to either transfer the name to see if they want to renegotiate the principal or however they want to do it. They have a chance of, sometimes they'll refinance it, depending on what year these were financed. How the rates have been. If they're really low, they may be able to refinance, as they did in the case of the town of Seneca Falls, or they'll just slide over and it'll become town responsibility, but it really will end up as part of former village resident debt.
Now, the fire department, the fire trucks that are bonded, that debt would probably go to the fire district though, right?
That was part of the recommendation.
That was part of the recommendation.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So does that mean no more money would go into these reserve funds then, from here this day forward?
That's up to the village on whether they
Yeah,
will
that's-
put,
Keep it, right.
They may do it depending on their budget, they may not, or they may take some of that reserve if they need a piece of equipment for which it was intended, and in the next 2 years have to purchase something.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be looking at a police car, within the next.
Right. But again, whatever decision you make, we have to take that snapshot in time and it'll be at the 2012-13.
Using
11,
those
12.
numbers.
Yes,
Using
the
those numbers. But again, for the sake of making the before
Yep,
comparison to after,
right,
to educate the residents,
right.
to calculate what the debt district cost, whether the tax impact, I'm sorry, I'm searching here, the debt district tax impact, in order to calculate that, Connie would need to know if this committee wants the reserve funds to be used wherever possible to reduce that, or whether the reserve funds are going to transfer over and therefore they won't have an impact on that particular figure.
Does that make sense? We want to make
It's
sure
so
that.
complex, and we're so
That
sorry
makes
that
sense,
it's
right?
this
Alright.
complex. but-
So, my original recommendation was that the fire truck reserve would go to the fire district, water reserve fund and sewer reserve fund would go to the water and sewer district. And then the other two, the Department of Public Works and the police car reserve fund, if there's any money there, would go to reduce village debt,
Wherever possible.
wherever possible. Is that a,
Yeah, we just voted.
want to make a motion, want to make that as a motion?
Yeah.
All right, second? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It carries.
Excellent. Okay, next item, unemployment costs. And the fundamental question is who is responsible. We are recommending that the committee consider a motion that would establish, for the purpose of financial calculations in the dissolution plan, that the town will charge the debt district that consists of former village residents with all costs associated with unemployment insurance for former village employees who are eligible. It's a question that, again, was probably posed to the controller's office, and I don't know if we'll ever get an answer.
And the way we would calculate that is based on the elimination of positions that you each vote, that the subcommittees came back with. We now have, based on those recommendations, know how many people would be eligible to draw unemployment and can do that calculation.
I can't remember, do municipalities, they don't pay into unemployment insurance?
No, you have
It's
to have it.
100%. It's 100% funded by the,
Self-insurance, yes.
yeah.
It's true.
So do you want to make a motion that the expense for the unemployment insurance be kept into a debt district for the current village?
Yeah, so as much a recommendation is for the purpose of
How
financial
about the
calculations.
town? Are we encompassing all? Because you're going to have
Just
town
village
employees.
employees.
Just village people who are
Any
laid
town
off.
employees that are laid off would be town expense.
Okay.
Yeah, this particular assumption would just be the village
Just
employees,
village
because it
people.
affects that village debt figure.
You're doing this for a debt figure in the next 2 years before the dissolution
No.
or after? And after the dissolution, if there is one, there is no more village employees. They all go into the town because they become new employees, quote from you guys. So there is no more village employees, so that
You have-
unemployment rate should be diluted throughout the whole township.
Well, it becomes an
That's the
expense for the
discussion.
town.
We're not talking about contribution to unemployment insurance, we're talking about actually paying the unemployment benefits for employees that are let go as a result of dissolution. So we're talking about just the village
So
employees let go.
through all this scenario, if 5 are let go, those are the 5 people that are village employees. That would be another
That-
line item on the,
Be part of the debt district, yeah, yeah. And we do recognize that this is, in terms of the cost calculations, these will go into what we would refer to as a one-time cost. They're not a long-term, debt or a long-term liability, but we do have to fit them into the calculations. And so who would be responsible for that is the...
Keep extending it. They'll keep extending it 99 weeks.
That'd be in 5
They
years
just
before you're
lowered it.
done.
All right.
I think I already asked this question before. We have about $15,000 in a trust emergency fund. Can we use that as a revenue to the debt district for unemployment? Or where does our reserve fund, not reserve fund, I'm sorry, wrong word. Where does our money that we have set aside for unemployment, where does that go to? Can that be a reduction to the debt district for unemployment?
Or to the debt district for any purpose, frankly, right? That's an excellent question. I don't know that there is or is not a limitation in terms of what that trust and agency fund can be used for. And that would probably be an Art Williams question. I guess what I would suggest is that the assumption for calculations that this resolution would, or this motion would establish doesn't preclude the trust and agency account or fund being used to offset the debt district.
Or you could treat it, Mayor, as you would as the time comes up, as any unreserved fund balance. If you put that back into the general fund or something, then you would still have the use of that for, you're going to have many expenses. So in order to try to show it, I mean, we can put it as a revenue against one-time expenses. It's really going to look very confusing.
Because it's not a fund that is represented in the budget or in the the budget figures that we're working with right now, it really is a completely independent account. So that being the case, once you've checked with Art about limitations or restrictions in terms of its use, then we could probably figure out later. But it could be used to offset. I mean, what we're talking about today doesn't preclude how it's used. Right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yep.
That triggers another question that I have, and it's not on unemployment, it's Lisa Cole's.
That's coming up.
207C.
That's coming right up.
And we have, if you have 50,000.
We're coming to that, so we'll discuss.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah. So in terms of, basically the question at hand is who's going to be responsible for unemployment costs, and does the committee then want to establish the assumption that the town will charge the debt district that consists of former village residents for that expense?
So that's the resolution.
I'll make a motion on that.
Second? If so, all in favor? Opposed? Carries.
Okay. Next item is renovation costs. This one might very well be tabled for the next meeting for determination, but we'll just explain. We're looking for approval for a dollar figure for renovation costs associated with the recommendation that came from the admin subcommittee and court and public safety. Didn't really fall into any one recommendation, but the co-location of court and police, along with the move in admin offices, the committees agreed that there would be no additional computer costs for police and court to move together into Village Hall, but an estimate is required for items such as adding or moving phone lines, partitions that might be necessary, signage, security requirements, etc., for the 2 approved moves. Chairman, if you might want to create a small group that will maybe do that exploration. And
is there anyone interested in being on a new subcommittee that looks into the cost of renovations for the?
What are we talking about? A couple contractors, 3 or 4 contractors come in and give us a rough idea?
Maybe just one contractor. But we have to figure out exactly what has to be done first. We have to sit down with the chief, the village, and town supervisor, and say, okay, this is what our plans are, what changes need to be made, and once we know what the changes are need to be made, then we can bring in maybe 1 or 2 contractors. So give us a general idea what the cost would be.
Well, and given the limited time frame, I'm not even sure that you may decide that speaking with the contractor isn't, or getting a formal estimate isn't important.
Yeah, you're right. No,
right?
we just need an estimate.
Yeah, it's something better than just an arbitrary guess.
Right.
Something more educated and more calculated would be helpful.
If you all got it.
Jim and I know.
Right.
So we have to meet with the chief and to see if the courtroom we're going to enlarge
the courtroom down upstairs is going to be dissolved.
That's right. And so we're thinking about the original boardroom and the one next to it.
Right, the conference room, that would be the new courtroom.
Actually, the clerk there, Julie, she's very knowledgeable in what the unified court system would require for security and communication.
We're still talking making the boardroom bigger downstairs, right?
Yeah.
Well, the boardroom would be taken out. Yeah, the boardroom, we now got the wall between the boardroom and the,
The roomers would meet in.
right.
And not to give one person preference over another, but Kenny Pullen just did quite a little work in the town courtroom to accommodate some of the needs that Judge Hartwell and the Unified Court System required in there, so he would.
That was 30.
Actually, find out the bearing walls
30
and if it
grand
can
there.
be done and. Okay.
Right. And
No
I'll be
sense
happy,
reinventing the wheel if you've got people that already know what's required for the courts.
yeah, I'd be happy to work with you too, so. We'll get something to you before the 15th.
Okay, by August 15th.
Okay, next item is the audit. An estimate of the cost of an auditor actually would, in essence, be two different contracts. One to close the books for the village, do a final closure of the books, and another to audit the books post-dissolution. Mayor had some excellent information about prior audit costs. And Mayor, did you want to make a recommendation based on that? You had mentioned
Probably about 20,000 before for just the annual closing, 12 for, that's what it cost us the last time for a single audit. When you're dealing with grants like we do with federal funds and state funds, you have to have single audits. That plus another 4,000 just because there will be additional costs for doing the paperwork and
Final audit.
the final audit for the.
Can you get the state comptroller to audit the books?
No, they won't.
They would do.
No, yes. No, so I would recommend about 20,000. And I think our last year's budget was 12.
I think that's green. Does that single audit go on as long as the federal grant funds, the service life of whatever you use them for? Is that single audit required?
Yeah, we had to have it annually. I think maybe this year we don't need it.
Okay.
But we are applying for grants for
Understand.
CDBG.
So it's only when you have an active grant?
Right.
Okay.
So we have a motion of $20,000. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Okay.
Opposed?
Just a question on that, that 20,000 is like your annual profit.
No, 16 is the annual.
Oh, okay, so you think that
Well, yeah,
for the extra $4,000, you could get the closeout done
Have
as
things
well?
done.
There's kind of a speculation on that.
it is a speculation, but again, it gives us a working number to go forward.
Yeah, right now we use 12 and 4 is 16,000.
Mhm.
So we add another 4,000.
It seems like a reasonable estimate. Okay, Mary, your 207C question. Will the committee approve 207C compensation costs or recommend for inclusion in the plan 207C compensation costs for a past police officer to be carried over as part of the debt district for former village residents? And as Mayor, you pointed out earlier that it would really be wise to reference both the costs and the receipts associated with 207C compensation costs for the former police officer currently receiving those benefits.
right. It's around 53,000 for the cost, total cost. And then from compensation, $17,004 for reimbursement to the village for the portion that count will pay.
So looking for a resolution from the
Okay.
committee to,
So-
for the purpose of those calculations.
So we're going to keep that as a in the village debt.
We're
Since-
talking about the one person
That's, yes.
Yeah. Unfortunately. I'm working on retirement to see if we can somehow get a retirement. We've been denied twice on disability, and now I'm talking with the attorneys for regular retirement. Can we force the issue of regular retirement?
But, so, the motion is that the cost of the 207C remain as a village expense post-dissolution. All in favor?
No.
Well, so you want it to become a part of the whole town? The town would pay for it and not the village? Someone's going to pay for it.
Keep in mind the distinction between a recommendation based on what you think is right versus the recommend.
The right thing is stop paying for it. That's the right thing to
No.
do.
The point I'm trying to make is
Then we'll have
this is
legal
less a
fees.
discussion about the way things ought to be,
Right.
and this is more a discussion about what assumption can we make going forward about who is going to end up paying for this. So we're just looking for
If it becomes a
calculations.
situation in the next 2 years where she gets retirement, then it's not a problem. But it's going to be an ongoing problem, and it's going to be an ongoing expense. And,
It should,
Right
be,
now.
it should be the expense of the village.
right.
We got two options, right? Expense of the village or it goes to the town.
Right, so the motion is that it stays with the village because she's a village employee, was a village employee. So again, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Who made the motion in second?
I asked, okay. I
I
think
think
Jim
it was
Basal
Jim
did.
Basal, yeah.
Jim Basal made the motion.
I'll second.
Jim Brady made a second.
Mayor, is there an ongoing budgeted amount that is being used to attempt to resolve this? I know you have an attorney that's working on it. Is there an annual fee to this attorney that's working on
No, it's per hour, and we have always put in extra money under the appropriation.
this? I just thought it would be somewhat opposed to assigning the cost of the 207C wages minus the compensation to the debt district and not making some provision to continue trying to mitigate this for the debt district.
I don't
If
go
we
wrong.
know an amount of money, we should add that in as an expense to the debt district as well in an attempt to mitigate this, because otherwise it's going to go on.
For legal, I didn't.
For legal expenses to try.
Basically, it's about $53,000.
Yeah.
Well,
Minus the 17,000.
It's only minus the 17. If
Well, you
buy that,
gotta
you'll-
show it
I mean,
as
you can
revenue.
show it, but you're still gonna recoup another 10 to 15 in lawyer fees when you do pursue it.
Yeah.
How,
It's about 53,000 a year.
well, whatever your legal fees are to try to do that.
I think we should have a separate item that we would assign to the debt district as a mitigation fee as to whether that's with an attorney or with a 207C specialist or whatever. I think the debt district should be given some amount that they can use in an attempt to mitigate this expense.
Put an end to it.
So if you said 10,000, well, maybe that's the magic number.
Well, I just said, you obviously gotta show the 17.5 for the compensation, but it's probably would be excluding that, it'd be right around the 53,000.
Mayor, do you actually also pay for the extended number of physicals that are required as you're going forward on this
No compensation.
compensation does? Okay, so it's just the legal fees
Yeah.
Chief is talking about.
Now, because they're right in the process right now of doing it again.
Okay, so the
Did
new
they-
motion,
Okay.
Well, this could be a second motion.
all right,
Yeah.
all right, so
Yeah.
this is the second motion.
Yeah.
Chief made the motion that we need to put money into the debt for attorney fees to try to take care of the 207C problem. Do I have a second on that?
Oh, second.
Joan,
For clarification, what was the amount? 10? 10?
We're gonna use 10,000.
Okay.
Dr. John?
And I think we should call that mitigation fees, because as you proceed on these 207C issues, you may find that the attorney fee becomes more of a 207C specialist. I mean, if the attorney isn't successful, maybe the debt district would want to look at a 207C firm that isn't necessarily an attorney exclusively. I think we should just say this $10,000 is a mitigation fee.
For the debt district, I think they're anticipating that to be yearly until she's off the books.
Okay, so 10K annual, okay, thank you, I just needed clarification. I've written down establish a debt district expense of $10,000 annually in mitigation fees to recommend to the town board to proactively pursue mitigating the existing 207C.
Thought that would be a village expense. Okay, so we have a motion from the chief. Do we have a second? All right. John was first.
Whatever, it doesn't matter.
All in favor?
John?
Aye. Opposed? And that passes. Okay, next item.
We're halfway through.
Yep.
Okay, insurance costs. Approve the use of previous budget village and town NYMER insurance figures, less prorated costs for fire protection, because that responsibility will shift to the district. But for post-dissolution for the budgeting for county, approve the use of the NYMER figures that are in the budgets.
Current budgets that we're going by.
Dan, is
That we're
the
going
town a NYMER member?
Yes.
Okay, so the motion is to use existing cost for insurance minus the fire department going forward.
So it becomes a combination of the existing costs, less fire department prorated.
I know we've asked for those figures, and once again this week asked for those figures, so will this bind us to this other cost if indeed we do get the cost from NYMER?
You can contingent upon not receiving the actual information from NYMER.
Okay.
So in other words, if you do receive that information, it supersedes this.
Okay.
That's a good recommendation there.
Okay, so that's the motion on the books. Do I have John is approving a second. Jim Pacello, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Thanks, sir.
Okay, workers' compensation, approve using a figure of 2% of all wages combined for the post-dissolution calculations of workmen's compensation costs. Again,
In
it's
the
just-
budgets, is that what you have in the town right now? Do you know?
I don't know.
Dan, is the town part of the county self-insured?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just the same as the village.
Right.
And we again, we really don't have the ability to research, what the impact of dissolution will be in that regard. So we're looking for a working figure to use going forward. That's based on
Past practice.
reasonable, past practice and reasonable estimates.
I'll make that motion.
Okay.
I'll second.
All in favor of the 2% workers' comp expense going forward? Aye. Opposed? It passes.
Okay. Water and sewer rates. We just need it established by the committee. It's been a point of discussion. It was discussed at the subcommittee level, but I don't think it was formally discussed at the full committee level, so we're looking for a full committee vote. So we're asking for a resolution that is essentially states that for the purpose of financial calculations in the dissolution plan, that it's the committee's recommendation that the town conduct a water and sewer rate study at a time it deems necessary, and therefore adjustments in water rates will not be projected in the dissolution plan. If you remember that the recommendations, the subcommittee, the net result of the subcommittee recommendations is that the compensation for an individual that is that serves as water and sewer supervisor, but also is compensated from the general fund, that individual's compensation will shift entirely to water and sewer fund. So that there will be an impact on water and sewer fund for that shift in source of compensation. But this resolution just establishes that while there's going to be water and sewer fund inclusion in the report narration and in the fund analysis, there will not be a rate analysis included in the dissolution plan. That is a study unto itself and is fairly complex, and had we embarked on that process, we would still be at the very initial stages of this process. So just establishing that rates will not be projected
Do I have someone to make that motion?
in the dissolution
I
plan.
understand what she's saying.
All right.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a second.
Okay.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I abstain.
All right, it passes.
We did say at a time it deems necessary. So. Okay. Distribution of assets. Approval of the assumption that the village will give up all of its assets to the town. The town would presumably not question the value of those assets. We're establishing this point of discussion because we believe that it would eliminate the need for a formal appraisal of real estate facilities and assets in general. So one of the dissolution costs that was on our list of potential dissolution costs was appraisal of assets. If there is general agreement between the town and village that the assets don't need to be appraised, it's one dissolution expense that can be eliminated. So we're looking for this committee to allow us to do the budget calculations and do the list of dissolution-related expenses and make the assumption that the village will give up the assets, the town will and village will agree on value, and we can eliminate the need for a formal appraisal and therefore eliminate that dissolution expense.
What would be the purpose of an appraisal? Where are the pitfalls of not having an appraisal?
The pitfalls would be that if the value of any of the assets is contested, you then have no third-party authentication of the value of the assets. It's a matter of...
Where would that come into play?
It really, as of now, is not coming into
It's
play.
not coming into play unless there's something either verse on the books when you're going to close out the village, if there's some point of contention. Typically, if the village agrees, then and the town just says we're going to take all the assets, then it's fine. And then whether they choose to declare them excess or they decide they want to sell them, whatever they want to do, at that point they'll get a fair market value and do that. We at the village of Seneca Falls had done, and we were told to do an appraisal, again, one of the first big ones. And it's very costly, and it was just, it was used to determine a balance sheet of what the assets were versus the debt, and at this point, if the village says, well, all the assets are going to go over and there's no contention, then there's no point in putting it into the one-time dissolution cost. If down the road, as it gets closer or after the village decides if something needs to be done, then the town can make that determination.
How would contention come into play, or it would not? What?
It shouldn't, but you just don't ever know. You know, I mean, we had it done so that everything was, we knew exactly what the assets of the village was, and it was used to set the discussion of, you know, here are all the assets going over to the tune of, let's say, $4 million. And the village then said, we have such little debt, if you're going to take all of the assets, could you forgive the debt and not have a debt district? That was the substantiation.
That was
We lost. We still had a debt district and they still took all the assets. But that was at that time the discussion, and the attorneys felt that we needed an appraisal. In this point, it sounds as though the assumption can be that the village is willing to give the assets over to the town, and therefore there should be no problem. But again, down the road, this is a snapshot in time, and for the assumption for our calculations down the road, if the town decides they want to have an appraisal, then I'm sure once the village dissolves or at the very end, they can agree to have it done and either split the cost or whatever.
The appraisal, and when allowed to, that should be used to pay down the debt before it goes over.
Okay, so
Because if,
who takes, all right, if there's assets that are not dissolved, the village hall goes over to the town. The parks go over to the town. So you think that the town should pay the village for the village hall?
No.
And okay, so where would we?
I'm looking at if we have an asset of a $150,000 payloader and we have a $40,000 debt on it, why should we give them the payloader when we can sell the payloader and pay off the debt, and then it will help the district of the village of not having such a high debt to service line.
Well, actually, the village could do that before they.
That's what I'm saying. That's my recommendation.
Yeah.
I think there should be, the village should do the appraisal with the intent of lowering the debt to service before anything happens, if it does happen.
Well,
Jeff, I could make a recommendation. Instead of paying a third party to do appraisals, we have all this equipment and assets and everything has assigned values through the insurance. Every year you go through that assigned values.
Yeah.
Why can't we defer to that value instead of paying for an appraisal?
because that's just a yes.
You know, a building, I consider a building to be a wash, Sergey. If the building's gonna be now the town's, it's a wash. But if there's assets, say, $1 million in the bank, or $300,000 worth of equipment, but it has $150,000 worth of debt to it, the village should work as hard as they can and as stringent as they can to get rid of that debt.
Do we know how much that is on us?
Here's the,
Oh, yeah, it's right in front of you.
yeah, here's the debt, the listing of the debt, and the last item here is equipment purchase. Mayor, maybe you can elaborate.
Which one?
The fire truck, the recommendation so far has been that the fire truck debt goes to the fire department, right?
Yeah, I put on the side where the recommendation would be.
Oh, thank you. Here it is, all the way to the right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's two there for fire district. There's water fund, sewer fund. That district is in the general fund. Here, can report that's that district. We had a paving program, that district, and equipment purchase for last year, and that would be part of the debt district.
Well, I could see the equipment purchase, the equipment that's being handed over to the town, if it's more than what it's worth, they should forgive the debt. I mean, I agree with that.
That's what I'm looking at. Not per se buildings and parks and stuff like that.
Right. So anything that goes to the fire, water, or sewer district, that's going to just slide through. That's not going to change.
Right.
But anything that goes to the debt district that we feel, like the Erie Canal corridor, that's the expense to.
They put in steps.
There was a project 10 years ago that was.
All right. So that would still be the village debt. The only one I can see is the equipment, right?
Which has 26.4 left on it.
So this leads to my second part of my question, Sergey.
Yep.
Say there's X amount of dollars in the bank, surplus money, that's an asset. That's going to just.
Oh, no, the cash would go to pay down debt. We don't expect
It's an
it.
asset.
That needs to be established.
You need to establish where that money is. Nobody's talking about it in the last 4 months. If there's $1 or $1 million or $2 million, where's that money going? And if we can use it to close out the debt, why wouldn't we?
Well, I think that, I just assumed that if there was cash, it
It's
would
an
go
asset.
toward the debt. Why would we expect them to give any money in the bank to the town when the village has debt?
I'm asking.
Don't
Okay.
forget, they're still gonna have a huge one-time dissolution cost that has to be paid.
Yeah.
They may choose to use their unreserved fund balance at that last year in anticipation of what's left of funds they haven't been allocated.
And that
Right.
way village taxpayers don't get hit with a.
But
you know,
we're
high
saying
tax
is
rate
that
for last
regardless of what happens, any cash in the bank would not go to the town. I think that's a recommendation that
It's got to eventually.
Where's it gonna go?
it's gonna go to pay off debt.
It'd
Yeah, but if you
still
got
be-
a $500,000 in debt and you got $3 million in the bank, there's still $2.5 million left.
goes
You know,
to-
hypothetically speaking, that money is an asset. So,
I hope it's that way.
Yeah.
well, I understand. I'm not
Okay. Well,
saying
right
it should or
now-
shouldn't. I'm just saying
Okay.
we've never brought it up. I just want to know
Right
what's
now,
the direction on it.
on the balance sheet, how much cash do you have in the village?
About $1.3 million, $4 million.
Okay, and as far as debt goes, you just have these
General
items here.
fund, general fund. Well, you get to, and there's,
But that's their
the
operating
paving
costs,
program
right?
is 51,000 left
October,
over,
it's the difference between the expenditures and the
264,000
revenue.
in equipment. And Erie Canal, 50, I think we got 50.
Yeah, you're talking a lot of this stuff can be washed off. There should be no debt.
Right,
When we go, if this does come to fruition, there should be no debt line on the town tax for the village district.
yeah.
Well, there will be non-callable. There will be, what among the.
You'll have a yearly, you'll still have retiree health insurance.
Well, that stuff's
Yeah.
understandable.
Yeah,
That
we
was
haven't
already
gotten to
passed
that
on
yet.
and agreed upon, because that's contractual stuff. But I'm looking at physical assets, money, all this stuff, these are all physical assets that have been done. We've never talked about alleviating these debts.
Can we recommend that a separate fund, any money, any cash that's left at the end of at the dissolution, could that be put into a separate fund to help alleviate the special district expenses?
How about the water and sewer? Can you transfer over to that?
They're separate.
They're separate. They're benefiting
self-supporting.
I mean, you need help there, that's for sure.
When,
Yeah, the funds have to be segregated by.
when general fund is closed out at the end of it, and I know
Yeah, water
you
and
know this.
sewer.
There's
The
debt
general
used
fund
from
is
the general
closed
fund
out.
in the water department that should be alleviated. There's money here that's general fund, these should be alleviated.
If that money isn't set aside for something.
If it's
for
not
example-
earmarked, that's understandable, but if it's in the general fund, that's
I
free game to
understand
pay
that,
out
but
that.
again, if the village, as they're implementing that last year, if they do in fact dissolve December 31st, 2015, I believe is their dissolution date. During that last year and during the budget, the village is going to take a look at all the expenses. They're going to take a look at whatever they have to pay, whether it be union, whether it be accruals for vacation, whatever it is, and do that math. And they have the opportunity to put that in the budget for a tax rate, or they can signify that unreserved fund balance to be used for that buyout, or they can pay the debt. It's either pay me now or pay me later. You're going to have something left.
Right, where they can appropriate it for the last budget.
Right.
My point is, if it doesn't get done in some kind of resolution, and that money goes over to the township, they put it in their general fund because it's not earmarked,
Right.
we still have a debt line on the village district,
That's
and
right.
that's not correct.
That's right.
And that's when you need
What
to.
happens.
Make it
Well, it's not
general.
right.
I don't think no one should be transferred over if we have a debt there.
That's why I'm bringing it up now.
Well,
I
make
want
a
something to be
general,
done
make a
now.
general resolution that any leftover money, we pay the debt.
Pay the debt,
That certainly could be part of the dissolution plan.
let's do it.
All right. Is that a motion, Jim Grady?
I'll
Yes.
second.
Jim Pacello, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Could you read that back, please, Ryan?
Yeah. Any leftover funds will be used to pay down debt for the village debt district.
Any leftover unreserved
Unreserved
general fund?
Correct.
Why do I have to repeat it? You know.
Making it official.
I thought he was gonna give me a base or something.
Going back to the
Wherever
appraisal,
possible, to reduce outstanding debt, remaining wherever possible, correct? Because there's that issue of non-callable.
can I ask a question about whether we do or we do not do an appraisal? Is that something that the dissolution committee should decide, or is that something the village board should decide? I'd be very hesitant to vote that we not do an appraisal as a member of the village board.
Okay, again, we're not, has less to do with what the recommendation is.
This is strictly a
This is for
recommendation.
costing.
For cost.
This is for costing
Costing
purposes, not for
purposes.
day-to-day
Do we
operations.
include an estimate? I mean, basically, we could word it that way, if it would make you feel more comfortable. Does the committee wish us to include an estimate for appraisal costs among the dissolution costs calculated in?
I would say no.
If they say no, then it doesn't go in there, but the village has every right to say that last year, if you want fair market value on all of your assets, you certainly can have an appraisal.
Who's going to buy it?
Well, and I'm not saying that
And
it
not-
will be
won't,
sold,
but
but
you still have the
And
opportunity.
maybe not everything. Maybe if
I
we
can
got
see the payloader, like John
Right.
said.
excess
Yeah.
equipment, but that's just a minor thing. You know, we're not talking about somebody coming in and appraising all the properties.
Yeah, but it could possibly happen in a scenario down the road when it comes closer, the town might come to the village and say, look we really don't want that building, we want to relocate here, let's sell it and put that money towards the other building. You know, there's a lot of scenarios that could happen.
Right.
They're all unpredictable.
But just for coming up with the expenses as we're going forward for our recommendation, there's a motion that we do not include appraisal costs in the final expenses.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
I'm going to abstain on that.
Abstain,
I'll abstain also.
passes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sir, can I make a motion on that?
Jim Brady,
What's that?
you made the motion. Are you-
The chief.
I make the motion that all unused general fund goes to the debt.
Jim Brady made the motion and Chief made the second.
Thank you.
We went from general fund to the appraisal.
Yeah, we jumped, okay. Okay, got it. So I got both of them, we got both of them. Last item, retirees' health insurance costs. And again, this is based on previous discussions. For the purposes of the calculations, does the committee want us to use a continuation of the current cost figures for retirees' health insurance plans and carry forward, use the assumption that the same plans will carry forward and therefore the same costs, and use the annual costs as a calculation as part of the debt district for former village residents? The alternative to that would be to actually have to do an actuarial study and cost it out and finance it out. And then, so a much simpler method would be to just continue, for the sake of the financial calculations, the current expense associated with continuation of the existing plans for retirees.
Can we add to that it should be reviewed? I mean, a lot of these hospitalization plans have been in place a long time, and there's
Ours is new. very new and it is less than it has been.
This is for the retirees also?
Yeah, and
It's strictly
Brian and I
retirees.
checked with the current town plan and they won't take retirees.
This is strictly
Additional
retirees.
retirees.
And then there's also the question of the town.
The town won't.
The town would be responsible for the town retirees. It wouldn't be fair for the village to take that cost on too. So there'd be a separate budget item on the town budget for town retirees, and the village retirees would stay in the village debt district.
I would recommend making those two separate motions only because the discussion piece on the town employees would be whether they were up until now an A fund or a B fund expense, whether that's up until now been regarded as a town-wide expense, and keep in mind that village residents are town residents.
Right.
So they may in fact be part of it that pays those fees to begin with, but where, if in fact they were B fund, is that correct? Am I referring to it right, B fund? Then that's a valid, that makes sense.
Okay.
But if they maintain that they have been paid from the A fund, then it would end up being a point of contention. So you might want to separate them out.
Okay. So the first motion will be that the village retiree expenses will remain in the village debt district. Do I have someone to make that motion?
I'll make that.
It's not retirement, it's the ones that are already retired.
Yeah.
It's retirees, and it's the continuation of their plans as they
Sure.
exist, and the annual cost of those plans.
So we have a motion. We have a second, John. All in favor?
Aye.
I'll abstain because I'm one of those retirees.
Yeah, well, we know how much it costs me, so.
Yeah, I'm expensive.
Less than the 207C.
Yeah. All right.
Everything.
All right, so that passes. Now, the second motion is that if the town is currently has a separate fund for their retirees' health insurance, that would continue being a separate town expense and not be included in the village debt.
I'll make that motion too.
Motion, second,
Second.
Joe, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. See, that wasn't too bad.
Oh, you guys did good.
As fast as, not as fast as last meeting.
I have one question.
Yes.
There's some village employees now that have a retirement plan, and they have health insurance, or they have retirement plans. When they go over to the town, are they still gonna be able to receive the same retirement plan? Through civil service or through?
Yeah.
New York State, New
It's
York
all-
State employees, it's the same.
It depends on their plan.
The police and fire, I believe, I know that there was some research.
Because I know
we had
we've
to
talked
do.
in the past about health insurance is only paid a certain X amount of dollars. It's lower than what the village pays now.
Health insurance
And I was
is
just
different.
asking, does the town have a lesser retirement plan than the village does?
You're talking New York State employee retirement, they're the same.
Okay, I just want to
New York
make it
State
clear, because
retirement.
I don't think it's fair that anybody that's a village employee that's got 20 years and he wants to work another 4, and he or she rolls with the town, they lose that benefit they've already earned, so.
It's the
They may
same
lose their
retirement.
benefit for health insurance based on what the town, if the town has a certain 15 years of retirement, you
I'm
have
talking retirement.
He's talking strictly
just strictly retirement.
Because I know X amount is being put in, they put in so much and then the state will put in after that. and
Well, retirement
it accumulates.
billed to the municipality by the state, so you're either in state retirement or police and fire retirement.
But I'm just looking at,
Yeah.
thinking that I don't think they should be able to lose
No.
it. Shouldn't be losing anything if they've already
They
earned
won't.
it.
No.
Not through state retirement system.
State retirement.
Okay, our next meeting is going to be August 15th. We want to meet, get a final, make sure everything is in because the next court date is August 20th. So we're going to meet on the 15th, get a report from the consultant as far as making sure that all the information they need to be presented in court on the 20th is here. So hopefully we'll hear something from the state comptroller's office.
Don't plan it.
But if we don't, we already made all the motions to take care of that as a right.
We'll hear from the renovation committee.
So the only ones that we have to do is the renovations committee. So Jim and Jim. And I will do that.
Just an explanation on the controllers. I've had experience seeking controllers' opinions, and because they somewhat set precedent statewide, it's a slow process. Although they indicate, yeah, we'll get back to you. Don't hang your head.
Chief, they never came. In Seneca Falls, they never came.
Don't hang your head.
22 months and the village is all and they never came.
Chief, Mr. Chairman, do we,
Monday about 1 o'clock, do we meet to go over that construction?
do you think, that's
Everything's done. The only thing that we have to
Sunday and Monday.
the renovation.
I can't, that's the only day I can't do, Tuesday. I can do Wednesday.
Yeah, we're
But
I'd like to talk to you.
I suggest Julie
Have a motion to adjourn?
give you a lot more.
Okay, well, the meeting is now
Get with Julie and she'll tell you what we talked about.